He was supposed to die in the alley. Instead, he remembered her name. The single mom who saved the drunk mafia boss never expected to see him again, until he showed up at her door, eyes clear, voice low. "You saved me once," Lawrence said. "Now you belong to my world." And from that moment, Sharon Floyd's life was no longer her own. I found the man they called New York's gentleman Kingpin bleeding all over my car hood at 2:00 a.m., reeking of top-shelf whiskey and muttering incoherently about ghosts. Lawrence Morgan, the name that made Wall Street executives and street dealers alike check over their shoulders, was now slumped against my rust-spotted Honda, his expensive tan jacket ruined by rain and what I desperately hoped was his own blood. My 7-year-old son Eli was sleeping safely at my neighbor's apartment 3 floors up, while I finished my double shift at the Bellagio Club, a high-end establishment I'd been bartending at for 6 months without realizing who actually signed the paychecks. The approaching sirens meant police, and police meant questions no single mother working under the table could afford to answer about a man whose legitimate businesses were whispered to be fronts for half of Manhattan's underworld. Making a split-second decision I'd surely regret, I somehow maneuvered his solid frame into my passenger seat, his designer clothes soaking my worn upholstery with rain and blood, while he mumbled something about never forgetting. "You better not die in my car," I muttered, peeling away from the curb seconds before a patrol car's headlights swept across the alley. "I just paid it off." The address I found in his wallet, a sleek leather thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent, belonged to a glass high-rise overlooking the Hudson River, where the night doorman's eyes widened in recognition before his face smoothed into professional neutrality. "Ms. Floyd," he said calmly, though I'd never told him my name and certainly had never set foot in this building before tonight. "We've been expecting you. Mr. Morgan's penthouse is on the 40th floor." He pressed the button before stepping back from the elevator, his expression unreadable. "And Ms. Floyd, this never happened." The doors closed on his knowing look, leaving me alone with the semi-conscious man who owned the club where I worked. Reportedly had connections from City Hall to the docks, and was now bleeding on my shoulder. As we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's go into the story. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan's glittering skyline like a kingdom laid out for inspection. Despite the grandeur, marble countertops, leather furniture, art that looked expensive enough to be stolen, the space felt cold and unlived in. No photographs on the walls, no books left open on tables, no personal touches that suggested anyone actually called this place home. Just wealth displayed like armor. Beautiful and impenetrable. I managed to half-drag, half-guide Lawrence to a charcoal leather sectional that probably cost more than I made in a year. His breathing seemed steady, despite the gash above his left eyebrow, but head wounds bled like hell, and I needed to clean it before making any decisions about hospitals or 911 calls that would bring questions I couldn't answer. I found a first aid kit in a bathroom that could have housed my entire apartment, all black marble and gold fixtures, and returned with supplies, my bartender instincts kicking in as I assessed the damage. As I gently pressed gauze to his temple, his eyes suddenly snapped open, hazel irises sharp and instantly alert despite the alcohol I could still smell on his breath. His hand shot up with startling speed, fingers wrapping around my wrist with controlled strength, stopping just short of causing pain but making the threat absolutely clear. "Who sent you?" His voice carried none of the slurring from minutes ago, low and dangerous and utterly sober. The transformation was so immediate and complete that I wondered if he'd been playing possum since the moment I'd found him, testing me, waiting to see what I'd do. "No one sent me," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline spike making my heart race. "I'm Sharon Floyd. I work at your club. Bartender, night shift." His grip loosened fractionally, but those calculating hazel eyes never left my face, searching for deception with an intensity that made me feel transparent. "The bartender," he said finally, recognition flickering across his sharp features. "With the little boy who waits in the break room sometimes when childcare falls through." The fact that he knew about Eli, that he'd noticed my son during those desperate nights when my neighbor couldn't watch him and I had no choice but to bring him to work, sent ice sliding down my spine that I fought hard not to show. I pulled my wrist free, gathering the bloody gauze with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. "You passed out against my car. The police were coming. I didn't think either of us wanted to explain that situation, so I drove you home. Now that you're clearly fine, and probably faking half of this, I really need to get back to my son." Something shifted in his expression at the mention of Eli, a flicker of something almost human beneath the cold assessment. "It's nearly dawn," he stated, glancing toward the wall of windows where the sky was just beginning to lighten from black to deep purple. "You shouldn't be driving exhausted. Traffic accidents ask questions too." Before I could protest that I'd driven tired plenty of times, he stood in one fluid motion that completely contradicted his supposed drunkenness and walked down a hallway, calling over his shoulder, "Guest room is second door on the left. I'll have coffee ready at 7. He disappeared around a corner, leaving me standing alone in the massive living room, too tired to argue and too aware that refusing might be more dangerous than accepting. I sent a quick text to my neighbor Rose, "Running late, everything okay?" and received an immediate reply, "Eli's fine, sleeping. You okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. So I just sent a thumbs up and found myself following Lawrence's directions to a guest room that looked like something from a hotel magazine, all neutral tones and expensive bedding. I sank into sheets that felt like clouds and told myself I'd only close my eyes for a minute. I woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the disorienting realization that I was still in Lawrence Morgan's penthouse. The events of the night rushed back as I checked my phone. 6:47 a.m., 3 missed calls from the club's manager, and another text from Rose, asking if I needed her to take Eli to school. The smell of fresh coffee guided me down the hallway to an open-concept kitchen where I stopped dead in the doorway, my brain unable to process the scene before me. Lawrence Morgan, the man whose name was whispered in back rooms and boardrooms with equal parts fear and respect, stood at the gleaming marble island in a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, plating what appeared to be perfectly cooked eggs and toast, like this was a normal Tuesday morning. "Your uniform was stained," he said without turning around, somehow sensing my presence before I'd made a sound. "I had it cleaned. There are clothes in the bathroom that should fit." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if having the single mother bartender who'd rescued him from police scrutiny standing in his kitchen was an everyday occurrence. He turned then, 2 plates in hand, and I got my first real look at him, sober and in daylight. Sharp jawline, dark hair still slightly disheveled, the cut above his eyebrow now cleaned and barely visible. And those unnerving hazel eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression on my face. "Why did you help me last night?" he asked, setting a plate in front of me along with coffee in a mug that probably cost more than my car payment. "You could have called the police, could have left me there." Could have robbed me. My wallet had $3,000 in cash. His gaze was steady, genuinely curious. So, why didn't you? I accepted the coffee, buying time to think, surprised by how much I wanted to answer honestly. I don't know, I admitted finally, the words coming out before I could stop them. Maybe because I've seen you at the club, how you treat the staff. Last month you personally made sure Maria's son got into that rehab program when she couldn't afford it. 2 weeks ago you covered Tony's hospital bills when his daughter got sick. I met his eyes. You pretend you don't care, but you do. So when I saw you bleeding and in trouble, I just couldn't walk away. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. As if I'd seen past the legend to something real underneath. And he wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. I remember everything, you know, he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of vulnerability I didn't expect. Every word you said in the car, every choice you made. I wasn't as drunk as I seemed. I needed to know if you'd help me or use me. He paused, that calculating gaze softening almost imperceptibly. You chose to help. That's rare in my world. Sharon Floyd. The way he said my name, with something almost like respect, made the air between us feel charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. And in that moment, standing in his pristine kitchen, with the city waking up beyond the windows, I realized my life had just shifted in ways I couldn't yet understand. I'd saved Lawrence Morgan, and from the intensity in his eyes, he was a man who never forgot his debts. The conversation hung between us like smoke, visible but intangible, shifting the air in ways I couldn't quite name. Lawrence gestured to the stool across from him. Sit, eat. You need to keep your strength up if you're working doubles. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. Something in between that made refusal feel more dangerous than compliance. I sat, my body making the decision my brain was still debating. The eggs were perfect, fluffy, seasoned just right, and I hated that I noticed, hated that I was hungry, hated that this felt almost normal. You saved my life last night, Lawrence said, his voice low and measured as he took the stool beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. That's not something I take lightly, Sharon. I don't forget debts. The way he said my name again sent an uncomfortable awareness down my spine. You don't owe me anything, I said, focusing on my coffee instead of those two sharp hazel eyes. Anyone would have done the same. His laugh was short, humorless. No, they wouldn't have. Most people in this city would have robbed me, called the cops for the reward, or left me to bleed out and avoided the complication entirely. He paused, studying me with an intensity that made me feel like a puzzle he was determined to solve. But you didn't. You risked police involvement, drove me to my home, cleaned my wound, and asked for nothing in return. I should get going, I said, standing abruptly. Eli will be wondering. Eli, 7 years old, likes to draw superheroes while you work. Lawrence remained seated, but his words stopped me cold. His favorite is Spider-Man, because, and I quote, he's just a regular guy trying to do good. My hands clenched at my sides. How do you know that? Because I own the Bellagio, he said simply, as if that explained everything. I know everyone who works for me, and you, Sharon Floyd, caught my attention months ago. He stood then, moving with that same fluid grace from last night, closing the distance between us until I had to tilt my head back slightly to maintain eye contact. You have a way of calming chaos, the way you handle drunk customers without escalating, how you remember regulars' orders without writing them down, the quiet competence in everything you do. You've been watching me. It should have sounded like an accusation. Instead, it came out like a realization. I notice people who are good at their jobs, he corrected, and people who are genuine in a world full of pretenders. He reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope. This is for your trouble, compensation for the risk you took, the cleaning your car will need. No, I stepped back, shaking my head. I didn't do it for money. His hand paused mid-extension. Something flickering in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Then why did you do it? The question echoed the one from earlier, but this time it felt heavier, more important. I met his gaze, searching for the right words and finding only truth. Because you looked human, I said quietly. For just a moment, underneath all the power and control and reputation, you looked scared and hurt and human, and I couldn't just leave someone like that. The silence that followed was thick with something I couldn't name. Lawrence slowly lowered the envelope, slipping it back into his pocket without breaking eye contact. Human, he repeated, as if testing the word. No one's called me that in a long time. Maybe they should more often. A smile ghosted across his lips, small, genuine, and gone, almost before I could register it. Maybe. He moved toward the elevator, pressing the button for me. Your uniform is in a bag by the door. I'll have my driver take you home. I have a car, which is currently in my building's garage being detailed and having the passenger seat reupholstered. He interrupted smoothly. Consider it a thank you, since you won't accept cash. The elevator doors opened. I should have felt relieved to escape, but something made me pause in the doorway, turning back to look at him standing in that cold, expensive penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. Lawrence, I said, his first name feeling strange on my tongue. Are you okay, really? For just a heartbeat, his carefully constructed armor cracked. I will be, he said, his voice rougher than before. Thanks to you. The ride home was silent, the driver professional and wordless. When I finally climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, Rose was waiting with Eli, who launched himself at me with the enthusiasm only 7-year-olds possessed. Mama, where were you? Did you have an adventure? I hugged him tight, breathing in his little boy scent of syrup and crayons. Something like that, baby. Rose gave me a knowing look over Eli's head, mouthing, "We need to talk," before heading back to her apartment. As I watched Eli return to his drawings spread across our worn coffee table, I couldn't shake the feeling of Lawrence's eyes on me, the way he'd looked at me like I was something rare and unexpected, the way his voice had softened when he'd said my name. I told myself it meant nothing, that he was a dangerous man from a dangerous world, and last night had been a one-time intersection of our separate lives. But when I found a business card slipped into the pocket of my cleaned uniform, just his name and a phone number, nothing else, I knew I was lying to myself. Lawrence Morgan remembered everything, and something told me he wasn't finished remembering me. 3 days passed before I returned to the Bellagio, and the moment I walked through the staff entrance, I knew something had shifted. The whispers started immediately, conversations that died mid-sentence when I approached, curious glances that followed me to the bar, speculation buzzing through the air like static electricity. Maria, my fellow bartender, leaned close while we prepped glasses for the evening rush. "Is it true," she whispered, "that you were seen leaving his building?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, focusing intently on slicing lemons. Sharon, Maria's hand covered mine, stopping the knife. The doorman at Lawrence Morgan's building is my cousin. He said you came in at 3 a.m. carrying the boss, left at 7 wearing different clothes. Her eyes were wide, half worried, half awed. What happened? Before I could answer, the main doors opened, and the entire club went silent. Lawrence Morgan walked in like he owned the place, which I now knew he did. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my annual rent, his dark hair perfectly styled, the cut above his eyebrow barely visible. But it was his presence that commanded attention. The way conversation stopped mid-word, how staff members suddenly became very interested in their tasks, the subtle shift in the air itself. His eyes found mine across the room, and he walked straight to the bar, ignoring every other patron waiting for service. "Sharon," he said, my name a greeting that somehow felt intimate despite the crowd. "You're back." "My shift," I managed, hyper-aware of every eye on us. "I work here." "I know." A slight smile played on his lips. "I wanted to make sure you were settled after the other night." He placed a sleek black credit card on the bar. "Dinner, on me. Whatever you'd like." "I'm working after your shift, then." It wasn't really a question. Before I could respond, a drunk voice cut through the tension. "Hey, sweetheart, how about some service over here instead of flirting with the boss?" The man, mid-40s, expensive watch, entitled sneer, stumbled toward the bar, reaching across to grab my wrist and pull me closer. "I've been waiting 10 minutes." He didn't finish the sentence. Lawrence moved with terrifying speed, his hand clamping over the man's wrist with precision that made the drunk yelp. There was a sickening crack, not loud, but definitive, and the man's face went white as he crumpled to his knees. "No one touches what's mine," Lawrence said, his voice ice-cold and perfectly controlled. He didn't raise it, didn't need to. The entire club heard him anyway. Security materialized instantly, dragging the whimpering man toward the exit. Lawrence released him without a second glance, his attention returning to me as if nothing had happened. "Are you hurt?" His voice softened fractionally, his eyes scanning my wrist where the drunk had grabbed me. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. My hands were shaking, and every person in the club was staring at us, at me, with expressions ranging from fear to fascination. "Lawrence, you just protected what's mine," he finished, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. "I'm not yours," I hissed, aware of the audience but unable to stop myself. "I'm not anyone's. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted this." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or realization. He nodded once, turned, and walked out as abruptly as he'd entered, leaving me standing behind the bar with everyone's questions written across their faces. He found me in the parking lot after my shift, leaning against my newly detailed car like he'd been waiting for hours. "That was out of line," he said without preamble. "The way I spoke, the way I claimed you. I apologize." I crossed my arms, exhausted and angry and confused all at once. "Do you? Or are you just sorry I called you out in front of witnesses?" "Both, probably." He had the grace to look almost sheepish. "I'm not good at this, owning someone, at caring whether—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so uncharacteristically uncertain it made him seem younger. "You saved me, Sharon, and in my world, that creates a bond I don't know how to handle without defaulting to control. I don't need controlling, I said quietly. And I don't need protection. I've been taking care of myself and Eli just fine. I know you have. He stepped closer, not threatening, just present. But now that I've seen what you're capable of, the strength, the compassion, I can't unsee it. Can't unknow that you're out there, vulnerable, because you chose to help me. His hazel eyes held mine. Let me repay the debt, Sharon. Not by owning you, but by ensuring you and Eli have the security you deserve. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? The question hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Before I could answer, a small voice called out from behind me. Mama? I spun to find Eli standing at the parking lot entrance, Rose hovering apologetically behind him. I'm sorry, Sharon. He got worried when you were late and insisted. It's okay, I said quickly, moving toward my son. But Eli's attention had already shifted to Lawrence, his 7-year-old curiosity overriding any sense of stranger danger. Are you Mama's friend? Eli asked, tilting his head. You're really tall. Lawrence's entire demeanor transformed. The cold crime lord melted away, replaced by something softer, almost gentle. He crouched down to Eli's eye level, making himself smaller, less intimidating. I suppose I am, Lawrence said, his voice losing its edge entirely. Your mama helped me when I was in trouble. I wanted to say thank you. That's what superheroes do, Eli announced proudly. Help people in trouble. Mama says being kind is the most important superpower. Lawrence's eyes flicked to mine, something vulnerable and raw passing between us. Your mama is very wise, he said quietly, and very brave. Watching him with Eli, patient, genuine, careful, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't the man who'd broken someone's hand without hesitation. This was someone else, someone real. And that, I realized, was far more dangerous than any display of power could ever be. The invitation came a week later. A simple text from Lawrence's number. Dinner. My place. Just talk. No pressure. I should have said no. Should have maintained the distance between his world and mine. But Eli's drawing of Mama's tall friend was stuck to our refrigerator, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way Lawrence had looked at my son, like he was seeing something precious and fragile he'd forgotten existed. So I went. The penthouse felt different this time, warmer, lived in. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the dining table was set with simple elegance, none of the sterile grandeur from my first visit. Lawrence greeted me in dark jeans and a navy sweater, casual in a way that made him seem more human, more accessible. Thank you for coming, he said, pouring wine. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I should. I accepted the glass, our fingers brushing briefly. Lawrence, what is this? What do you want from me? He was quiet for a long moment, his hazel eyes studying the wine in his glass like it held answers. Honestly, I'm not sure. But you asked me if I was okay, and no one's asked me that in years, decades, maybe. He looked up, vulnerability naked on his face. I wanted to answer you properly, without the armor. We ate slowly, pasta he'd made himself, surprisingly good, and somewhere between the second glass of wine and the city lights glittering beyond the windows, he started talking. My mother was killed when I was 9, Lawrence said, his voice steady but distant, like he was recounting someone else's story. Gang violence. Wrong place, wrong time. She worked as a seamstress in a building caught between two rival crews fighting over territory. He paused, his jaw tightening. She wasn't the target. Just collateral damage, acceptable losses in someone else's war. Lawrence, my father, disappeared after that. Couldn't handle the grief, I guess. Or maybe just didn't want the burden of raising a kid alone. He laughed, bitter and sharp. I ended up in foster care, bouncing between homes where I learned very quickly that power was the only currency that mattered. Be strong or be crushed. Control everything or lose everything. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. He stared at the contact like it was something foreign, something he'd forgotten the language for. I built this empire on one promise, he continued, his voice rough, that I would never be powerless again, never be the collateral damage in someone else's story, never watch people He stopped, swallowing hard. I've done terrible things, Sharon. Hurt people, destroyed lives, all in the name of control. But you've also helped people, I said quietly. Maria's son, Tony's daughter, the staff at the Bellagio who you pay above minimum wage and give benefits most restaurants don't offer. You're not just the monster, Lawrence. His eyes met mine, and I saw the war raging behind them, the desire to believe me fighting against years of self-imposed isolation. You saved me that night, he whispered. Not just from the police or from bleeding out. You saved me from disappearing into the myth I've created. You saw me as human. And his voice cracked. I haven't felt human in so long. I moved around the table without thinking, and he stood to meet me halfway. We didn't kiss, didn't cross that line. But when I wrapped my arms around him, he held on like I was the only solid thing in a tilting world. His face buried against my shoulder, breathing like someone learning how. I'm broken too, I whispered against his hair. Single mother, barely making rent, raising a kid alone in a city that eats people like me for breakfast. I'm terrified every day that I'm not enough, that one mistake will destroy everything I've built for Eli. You're more than enough, Lawrence said fiercely, pulling back to cup my face with surprising gentleness. You're everything. The intensity in his eyes should have scared me. Instead, it felt like recognition. Two people who'd survived different hells, seeing each other clearly for the first time. Miles away, in a darker corner of Manhattan, Marcus Vale sat across from two men whose faces belonged in police databases and wanted posters. He's compromised, Marcus said, sliding a photo across the table. Lawrence and me in the parking lot, Eli between us. The woman is making him soft, weak. He broke a client's hand for touching her, turned down the Castellano deal because it was too risky now that he has civilians to consider. The older of the two men, scarred face, cold eyes, studied the photo with predatory interest. The kid? 7 years old, attends PS 100E. 3 blocks from her apartment. No father in the picture. She works nights. Marcus's tone was matter-of-fact, clinical. Vulnerabilities everywhere. And you want? I want Lawrence to remember what we are, Marcus said coldly. What we've always been. Before some bartender with a savior complex ruins everything we've built. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Send a message. Nothing permanent. Just enough to wake him up. Remind him that sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. The scarred man smiled, and it was the kind of smile that preceded screaming. Consider it done. Back in the penthouse, Lawrence poured us more wine, and we talked until dawn. About Eli's drawings, about the restaurant Lawrence wanted to open, legitimate, no ties to the underworld, about the version of ourselves we might become if we were brave enough to try. Neither of us knew that across the city, Violence was already in motion. Neither of us realized that the ghosts of his past were about to collide with my present in ways that would test everything we were building. But for that one night, in the soft glow of city lights, we were just two broken people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could be more than our scars. The first sign something was wrong came when I returned home from grocery shopping with Eli chattering beside me about his day at school. Our apartment door was ajar. Just a crack, barely noticeable, but enough to make every instinct I had scream danger. "Eli, stay here," I whispered, guiding him to Rose's door across the hall. I knocked urgently until she appeared, confusion turning to alarm when she saw my face. "What? Keep him, please. Don't let him leave." I was already moving back toward my apartment, phone in hand, Lawrence's number pulled up but not yet dialed. I pushed the door open slowly, and my breath stopped. The living room was destroyed, furniture overturned, Eli's drawings torn and scattered, our few valuables smashed. But it was the wall above the couch that made my blood turn to ice. Scrawled in red spray paint, dripping like blood. Morgan's whore. Morgan's weakness. "We're watching the boy." My hand shook as I dialed Lawrence, the phone ringing once before his voice cut through, sharp and immediate. "Sharon." "They were in my apartment," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "They know about Eli. They—" "Stay there. I'm sending security. Don't move. Don't touch anything. Don't—" "Lawrence, what did you do?" The words came out broken, accusatory. "What world did you drag us into?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "I'm coming to you," he said finally. 20 minutes. Pack bags for you and Eli. You're not staying there." He arrived in 15, flanked by 4 men I recognized from the Bellagio's security. Lawrence's face was a mask of cold fury, but his hands were gentle when he touched my shoulders, scanning me for injuries. "You're not hurt?" "Physically? No." I stepped back, wrapping my arms around myself. "But Lawrence, they threatened my son. My 7-year-old son who draws superheroes and believes the world is good." "I know." His voice cracked. "Sharon, I swear to you, I will find who did this. I will—" "You'll what? Kill them? Start a war?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "This is what I was afraid of. This is what happens when you get close to someone like you." The words landed like a physical blow. Lawrence recoiled, something raw and wounded flashing across his face, before the armor slammed back down. "Pack your things," he said, his tone turning cold, professional. "I have a safe house in Westchester. 24-hour security, private grounds. You and Eli will stay there until—" "No, Sharon, they know where you live. They know about Eli's school. You're not safe here." "Safe isn't living!" I exploded, all the fear and frustration and impossible situation finally breaking through. "Safe is being locked in a cage while you play Kingpin and I'm just—" "What? Your responsibility, your possession, the civilian you need to protect because you feel guilty? That's not—" "It is exactly that." I grabbed the bag I'd hastily packed, my voice dropping to something quiet and final. "I can't do this, Lawrence. I can't have my son growing up surrounded by bodyguards and threats and violence. I won't let your war become his childhood." "Then what do you want me to do?" Lawrence's control was fracturing, desperation bleeding through. "Walk away? Pretend I don't care if something happens to you? Pretend I didn't—" He stopped, his jaw working. "You saved my life, Sharon. You made me remember what it feels like to be human. I can't just let you go into danger." "You don't get to let me do anything," I said, picking up Eli's favorite stuffed Spider-Man. "I'm taking my son, and we're leaving the city. I have a friend in Pennsylvania who—" "Sharon, please." "Goodbye, Lawrence." I walked past him, past his security, past the ruins of my apartment, and collected Eli from Rose's, with hurried explanations and promises to call. Lawrence followed us down to the street, his expression shattered in a way that almost broke my resolve. Almost. "I'm sorry," he said as I buckled Eli into my car. "For all of it. For dragging you into this, for not protecting you better, for making me care about you," I finished quietly. "That's the part I can't forgive." I drove away, watching him in the rearview mirror. This powerful, dangerous man standing alone on the sidewalk, looking more lost than when I'd found him bleeding at 2 a.m. 3 days later, the motel in rural Pennsylvania was cheap and anonymous, exactly what we needed. Eli thought it was an adventure, and I let him believe it, even as I jumped at every sound, checked the locks obsessively, and barely slept. I'd turned off my phone, cutting all contact with New York. With him. It was Rose who found me, showing up at the motel with her cousin who lived nearby, her face grave and tear-streaked. "Sharon," she said, pulling me aside while Eli watched cartoons, "you need to know. It's all over the news back home." "What is?" "Lawrence." Her voice broke. "There was an ambush. His lieutenant, Marcus something, turned on him, allied with some rival family. They attacked him at one of his properties." She gripped my hands. "Sharon, they're saying he's dead. His car was found torched, blood everywhere. The police have it cordoned off as a crime scene." The world tilted sideways. "No," I whispered. "No, he can't be." But Rose's expression told me everything. Lawrence Morgan, the man who'd made me believe monsters could become human, who'd held me like I was precious, who'd looked at my son with gentle wonder, was gone, and I'd left him. I'd walked away when he needed me most. The guilt crashed over me like a tidal wave, and somewhere in the wreckage of my heart, I made a decision that defied every logical instinct I had. I was going back. I left Eli with Rose's cousin, a kind woman named Teresa, who asked no questions when I pressed $300 into her hand and begged her to keep him safe for 24 hours. "Mama, where are you going?" Eli asked, his small face scrunched with worry that no 7-year-old should have to feel. I knelt down, cupping his face with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. "I have to help someone, baby. Someone who's in trouble." "Like a superhero?" "Something like that." I kissed his forehead, breathing in his little boy scent, praying it wouldn't be the last time. "I love you more than the whole world. Remember that, okay?" "I love you more than Infinity Spider-Mans," he replied, his standard response that usually made me laugh. This time, it almost made me cry. The contact information I needed came from Maria, who reluctantly connected me with her cousin, the doorman from Lawrence's building. He gave me a name, a number, and a warning. "Whatever you're planning, Ms. Floyd, it's suicide." Maybe. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. The man I called was someone named Vincent Russo, Lawrence's former head of security, now semi-retired but still connected. We met in a diner in Queens at midnight, his weathered face skeptical until I explained who I was. "You're the bartender," he said, recognition dawning. "The one who saved him. I need to know if he's alive," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And if he is, where are they keeping him? Vincent studied me for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his tired eyes. Marcus has him. Old meat-packing warehouse in Red Hook, near the waterfront. He's using it as leverage, trying to negotiate territory with the Castellano family before he trailed off. Before he kills him. Yeah. Vincent leaned forward. But Ms. Floyd, that place is fortified. Marcus has at least 10 guys, all armed. You walk in there, you die. Simple as that. Then tell me how not to die. I met his eyes. Please. He saved me first, you know. Found me at rock bottom, gave me a job, treated me like I mattered. I can't abandon him now. Something in my desperation must have convinced him, because Vincent spent the next hour drawing maps on napkins, explaining guard rotations, offering advice that sounded insane, but might keep me alive long enough to matter. His remaining loyalists are planning a rescue, Vincent said as we parted. But they won't move until tomorrow night. If you're going in now, you're alone. I know. He grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Lawrence Morgan is a hard man, Ms. Floyd, but the way he talked about you, like you were light in a world that forgot what light looked like. His grip tightened. Don't waste your life if you're not sure it's worth saving. I'm sure, I said, and I was. The warehouse loomed against the night sky like a monument to decay. Broken windows, rusted metal, the smell of river water and rot. I'd dressed in dark clothes borrowed from Teresa, my hair pulled back. Lawrence's business card clutched in my pocket like a talisman. The guard at the side entrance was young, barely 20, smoking a cigarette with the bored confidence of someone who didn't expect trouble. I need to see Marcus Vale, I said, stepping into the light. He startled, hand going to his weapon. Who the hell? Tell him Sharon Floyd is here. Tell him Lawrence Morgan's weakness wants to negotiate. They brought me inside with rough hands and rougher language, searching me for weapons I didn't have, shoving me through corridors that stank of mildew and blood until we reached the main floor. And there he was. Lawrence was chained to a support beam in the center of the space, his face swollen and bloodied, one eye nearly shut, his expensive clothes torn and stained. But when he lifted his head and saw me, the devastation in his hazel eyes was worse than any physical wound. No, he rasped, his voice wrecked. Sharon, no. Well, Marcus emerged from the shadows, tall, cold-eyed, with the kind of smile that preceded cruelty. The bartender. I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to show up. I'm here to make a deal, I said, forcing confidence into my voice despite my hammering heart. Marcus laughed. You have nothing I want. I have his attention. I gestured to Lawrence. The man you're trying to leverage, trying to break. He'll give you whatever you want if you let me go. Territory, contacts, money, name your price. Sharon, don't. Lawrence tried to stand, chains rattling. Shut up, Marcus snapped, then turned back to me with predatory interest. You think you matter that much to him? I know I do. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming to run, but forcing myself forward. Lawrence Morgan built an empire on control and reputation. But I've seen what's underneath. The man who remembers every debt, every loyalty, every person who showed him humanity. I raised my voice, addressing the men standing guard around the warehouse. How many of you has he helped? Paid hospital bills for? Gave second chances to? Protected when the system threw you away? Uncomfortable glances passed between some of the guards. Marcus's expression darkened. Lawrence may be chained, I continued, my voice ringing with conviction I half believed, but his reputation isn't. You kill him. You make him a martyr. Every loyal soldier he ever helped will come for you. But let us go. Let us disappear, and you get what you want without the war." Marcus considered this, then smiled cruelly. "Nice try, but I think I'll keep you both. Use you to send a message about what happens when sentiment makes you weak." The warehouse door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted. Vincent's loyalists arriving early, weapons blazing. Marcus dove for cover, shouting orders as chaos consumed the space. I ran for Lawrence, my hands fumbling with his chains as bullets ricocheted off metal. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice breaking even as his freed hands pulled me close. "Sharon, you shouldn't. I couldn't leave you," I whispered fiercely. We ran, his arm around me, both of us stumbling toward the exit where Vincent was waving frantically. Almost there. Almost safe. Then Marcus appeared, weapon raised, aimed not at Lawrence, but at me. Time slowed. Lawrence's body moved to shield mine. The gunshot was deafening. But it was my shoulder that exploded in white-hot agony as I twisted at the last second, pushing Lawrence behind me instead of the other way around. I hit the ground hard, the world tilting sideways, Lawrence's face above me, devastated, terrified, more human than I'd ever seen him. "Sharon! Sharon! Stay with me!" But the darkness was already pulling me under, and my last thought, before everything went black, was, at least I saved him one more time. I woke to the smell of antiseptic and the warmth of a hand wrapped around mine. My shoulder throbbed with dull, persistent pain, bandaged tight, the ghost of the bullet's path radiating through my entire arm. The room was unfamiliar but clean, sparse in a way that suggested functionality over comfort. Safe house, my foggy brain supplied, not a hospital, and beside my bed, slumped in a chair that looked too small for his frame, was Lawrence. He was asleep, or had been, because the moment my fingers twitched in his eyes snapped open, bloodshot, haunted, but flooding with relief so profound it made my chest ache. "Sharon!" My name came out ragged, broken. "Christ, Sharon, you're awake!" "How long?" My voice was rough, throat dry. 3 days. He leaned forward, his free hand brushing hair back from my forehead with devastating gentleness. "The bullet went through clean. Missed the bone. You lost blood, but the doctors said—" His voice cracked. "You're going to be okay." "Eli." "Safe. With Teresa and Rose. I have security on them, discreet but thorough. They don't even know it's there." He swallowed hard. "I wouldn't let anything happen to him, Sharon." "I swear." I studied his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble that suggested he hadn't shaved in days, the hollow look of someone who'd been to hell and wasn't sure he'd made it back. "Your empire," I said softly. "Marcus, doesn't matter." His grip on my hand tightened. "None of it matters. My properties are being seized, rivals are circling, half my contacts have gone underground or switched sides." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Everything I built for 30 years is burning, and all I can think about is that you took a bullet meant for me." "Lawrence, I remember every second," he interrupted, his voice fierce and tender all at once. "Every word you said that first night in my penthouse. You looked human, you told me. No one had seen me that way in decades, Sharon. Everyone else saw the legend, the monster, the man to fear or use or destroy." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. "But you saw me. And then you walked into a warehouse full of armed men to save my life, knowing you'd probably die." Tears burned behind my eyes. I couldn't let you die alone, not after you made me want to live." He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that felt like a vow. "I was dying long before Marcus chained me up, Sharon. Dying inside that cold penthouse, surrounded by wealth and power, and absolutely nothing that mattered." His hazel eyes held mine, raw and undefended. "You brought me back to life. Twice now." "So what happens next?" I asked quietly. "Your world is collapsing." "I'm a bartender with a bullet wound and a 7-year-old who still thinks you're a superhero." "Then I become the man your son thinks I am," Lawrence said simply. "I walk away from the empire. Liquidate what's left. Invest it legitimately. Build something clean." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "If you'll let me, if you think I can." "Lawrence, you can't just stop being—" "Yes, I can." His voice was firm, certain in a way I'd never heard. "I became this out of fear and necessity. But you've shown me there's another way to be strong. Through compassion. Through choosing to help even when it's dangerous. Through loving something more than you fear losing it." The word loving hung between us, unspoken but undeniable. "Marcus," I said, needing to know. "What did you do?" As we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go into the story. Lawrence's expression hardened fractionally. "Vincent tracked him down. Brought him to me yesterday, bound and bleeding just like I was." He looked away, jaw working. "I had the gun to his head. Had every reason, every right. He betrayed me, nearly killed you, destroyed everything." "But you didn't pull the trigger." "No." He met my eyes again. "Because I heard your voice in my head. Safe isn't living. You were right. Killing Hatim would just make me the monster again. So I gave him a choice. Disappear and never return. Or I hand him over to the Castellano family for what he cost them in the failed coup." A grim smile. He chose disappearing. I squeezed his hand, pride and relief mingling with the pain medication's fog. "You're changing. You're changing me," he corrected. "Every moment since you saved me. You've been showing me what strength really looks like. Not control or fear, just showing up, even when it's terrifying. Choosing compassion, even when it costs everything." He stood then, leaning over the bed with careful attention to my injured shoulder, his forehead resting against mine. "I love you," he whispered, the words trembling between us like something fragile and new. "I didn't know I still could. Didn't think I deserved to. But Sharon Floyd, you saved my life, and then you saved my soul, and I kissed him, cutting off the words with the answer they needed. It was gentle, careful of our wounds, both visible and not. But it was real, more real than anything I'd felt in years. When we broke apart, his eyes were wet, his smile tentative but genuine. "So what now?" he asked. "I have no empire, questionable legal status, and more enemies than allies." "Now," I said, wincing as I tried to sit up and accepting his immediate help, "you meet me for coffee like a normal person. Take Eli to the park. Figure out who Lawrence Morgan is when he's not being the gentleman kingpin." "And you?" His voice was soft, hopeful. "What do you want?" I looked at this complicated, dangerous, impossibly gentle man and knew my answer with absolute certainty. I want to see who we become when we choose each other over fear. His smile, true and unguarded, was worth every scar. Then let's find out, Lawrence said, his hand finding mine again. Together. Outside, the city that had been his kingdom continued without him, indifferent to the fall of an empire. But inside this small room, something far more powerful was being built. A future where love, not fear, wrote the ending. 6 weeks after the warehouse, Lawrence Morgan ceased to exist, at least the version the underworld had known for 3 decades. I watched the transformation from the small apartment he'd rented for us in Brooklyn, modest by his standards, palatial by mine, as he systematically dismantled an empire. Properties sold to legitimate buyers. Offshore accounts liquidated and reinvested. Contacts served with generous severance packages and ironclad NDAs. The Castellanos are furious, he told me one evening, studying spreadsheets on his laptop while I folded Eli's laundry. They're calling it disrespect, abandonment. Vincent says there have been threats. Are we safe? I asked, my hands pausing on one of Eli's Spider-Man shirts. Lawrence looked up, his hazel eyes soft in the lamplight. I've made arrangements. Insurance policies, if you will. They touch you or Eli, and everything I know, every dirty secret, every buried body goes to the FBI, the Times, and every rival family in the tri-state area. He smiled grimly. Mutually assured destruction. It's not elegant, but it works. You really left it all behind, I said quietly. The power, the fear, the control. I left behind the things that were killing me, he corrected, closing the laptop and moving to sit beside me on the couch. What I found in return, you, Eli, the possibility of being someone better, that's worth infinitely more. His hand found mine, and I laced our fingers together, still marveling at how natural it felt. The community center was Sharon's idea. You want to rebuild neighborhoods? She'd said one morning over coffee, Eli coloring at the kitchen table. Then actually rebuild them. Not just throw money at problems, but create spaces where people can help themselves. So Lawrence did. He bought a gutted building in the South Bronx and transformed it, after-school programs, job training, a commercial kitchen where locals could learn culinary skills. He hired staff from the neighborhood, paid living wages, and put Sharon in charge of programming. You have a gift for seeing what people need, he told her during the center's soft opening, watching her guide a nervous teenager toward the computer lab. For creating safety without control. Sharon had flushed with pride, and Lawrence realized he'd never wanted to give someone the world more than he wanted to give it to her. But domesticity wasn't always easy. I don't know if I can do this, Sharon admitted one night after Eli had gone to bed, her voice small and uncertain. They were washing dishes together, a rhythm they'd fallen into, him washing while she dried. Build a life with someone who used to order hits over breakfast. Explain to Eli why his friend Lawrence has bodyguards and enemies, and a past that terrifies you. Lawrence finished gently, setting down the dish he'd been scrubbing. Sharon, I understand if this is too much, if I'm too much. I can set you up somewhere safe, far from my history. Make sure you and Eli have everything you need. That's not what I want, she interrupted, frustration and fear warring in her expression. I don't want your money or your protection from a distance. I want... She stopped, swallowing hard. I want normal. I want to worry about parent-teacher conferences and grocery bills. Not whether your past is going to show up with guns. Then that's what we'll build, Lawrence said, pulling her close despite her soapy hands. Normal, boring, safe, I'll be the most aggressively domestic reformed criminal you've ever seen." She laughed against his chest, the sound watery but genuine. "You're ridiculous." "I'm in love," he corrected. "It makes people ridiculous." The quiet moments surprised Sharon most. Lawrence teaching Eli to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, his large hands guiding her son's smaller ones with infinite patience. The two of them sprawled on the living room floor, assembling a Lego set while she graded budget reports for the community center. The night she found them both asleep on the couch, Eli's head on Lawrence's shoulder, a half-finished drawing of my family clutched in her son's hand. 3 stick figures labeled Mama, Eli, and Lawrence. "He drew you with a cape," Sharon whispered when Lawrence woke, carefully extracting himself from Eli's grip. "He's generous with his heroism," Lawrence replied, but his voice was thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. She woke one night to find Lawrence sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her in the darkness. The streetlight outside cast shadows across his face, and something in his expression, tender and broken and grateful all at once, made her breath catch. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "I was thinking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "about all the things I've owned. Properties, businesses, loyalty bought with fear and money. Decades of accumulating power and possessions." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "But you, Sharon, you're the only thing I didn't have to buy. The only thing that chose me when you had every reason not to." Tears pricked her eyes. "Lawrence, I'm not seeking redemption from the world," he continued, his thumb catching the tear that escaped. "The world will always see the monster I was. But you," his voice cracked, "you see the man I'm trying to become. And if I can be worthy of that, of you and Eli choosing me every day, that's the only redemption I need." Sharon pulled him down beside her, holding him in the darkness while the city hummed beyond their windows. "You're already worthy," she whispered. "You just had to remember how to see it." He held her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. And for the first time since that rainy night at 2 a.m., Lawrence Morgan felt like he'd finally come home. 6 months later, the Bellagio reopened its doors, not as the upscale nightclub where I'd once bartended in someone else's shadow, but as something entirely new. The restaurant was elegant without being cold, intimate without being exclusive. Lawrence had transformed the space using my vision. Exposed brick softened by warm lighting, an open kitchen where diners could watch chefs work, walls decorated with art from local students at our community center. The menu featured elevated comfort food, the kind that reminded people of home while making them feel special. And I managed it all. "Table 6 wants to compliment the chef," Maria called from the host stand, her smile wide and genuine. She'd followed me to the new venture without hesitation, bringing half the old staff with her. "Third time this week, someone's asked for the recipe for your grandmother's pot roast." "Tell them it's a family secret," I replied, reviewing the reservation list, marveling quietly at how full we were booked. Legitimately full, with customers who came for the food and atmosphere, not because they feared the owner. Lawrence rarely came to the restaurant during service anymore. He'd learned to let go, to trust me with this piece of the empire he was building. The clean one, the one that made neighborhoods better instead of bleeding them dry. But tonight, after the last customer left and the staff filtered out with tired smiles and pockets full of good tips, I found him waiting. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, hands in the pockets of dark slacks, His white shirt rolled to the elbows. The city glittered beyond him like scattered diamonds, but all I could see was the man silhouetted against it. Powerful, still, but different. Human. "You're here," I said, setting down the clipboard I'd been holding. "I wanted to see it," Lawrence replied, turning to face me. "The culmination of everything we've built. Not the business. That's yours, and it's remarkable." He moved closer, his hazel eyes reflecting the golden light. "I wanted to see you in your element, confident, thriving, free." "Thanks to you," I said softly. "No." He shook his head, stopping an arm's length away. "Thanks to you. You're the one who took a chance on a broken man bleeding in the rain. You're the one who saw past the monster to something worth saving." "Lawrence, let me finish," he interrupted gently, and I saw his hands trembling slightly as he pulled them from his pockets. 6 months ago, I was drowning. 30 years of building an empire on fear and control, and I was the most powerless man in New York. Powerless to change, and to feel, to be anything except what I'd made myself. He took a breath, his voice roughening with emotion. "You found me drunk, bleeding, and half dead at 2 a.m., he continued, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning. "You should have walked away, called the police, protected yourself and Eli from the mess I represented." His eyes held mine. "Instead, you gave me a reason to live, and a reason to change. You showed me that strength isn't control, it's compassion. That power isn't fear, it's choice. That I could be more than the monster I'd become." "You were always more than that," I whispered. "Maybe," he allowed. "But I'd forgotten. And you, Sharon Floyd, with your fierce heart and your impossible courage. You reminded me." Then he did something that made my breath stop entirely. He knelt. Right there in the empty restaurant, this man who'd commanded empires and instilled fear in hardened criminals lowered himself to one knee and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I don't have the right to ask this," Lawrence said, his voice shaking now, vulnerable in a way that broke and rebuilt my heart simultaneously. "I have a past that will follow us, scars that won't fade, enemies who might never forgive my defection. But Sharon..." He opened the box, revealing a simple, perfect ring, elegant diamond, understated band. "You saved me once. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I remember. Let me be the man Eli drew with a cape. Let me build a future with you that's worthy of the second chance you gave me." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the city lights beyond the windows. "Sharon Floyd," he said, his hazel eyes bright with unshed tears of his own. "Will you marry me?" I dropped to my knees in front of him, framing his face with my hands, letting him see every emotion written across my features. "Yes," I breathed. "Not because you're powerful, or wealthy, or reformed, but because you chose to change. Because you became the father Eli needed, the partner I never knew I could have. The man who proved that even the darkest souls can find light if they're brave enough to reach for it." He kissed me then, deep and tender and filled with promise, while the city that had been his kingdom hummed beyond the windows, indifferent to the fall of an empire, but witness to something far more miraculous. Love built from ruin. Redemption earned through choice, a future written by two people who'd saved each other. Later, we stood together at those windows, my hand in his, the ring catching the light like a small, perfect star. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked quietly. Walking away from everything you built? Lawrence pulled me closer, his chin resting on top of my head. Every empire falls eventually, Sharon. But what we're building, this restaurant, the community center, our family, that's legacy. That's immortality. He turned me to face him, his smile soft and genuine. I spent 30 years making people fear Lawrence Morgan. I'd rather spend the rest of my life making one person and one little boy feel loved. I laughed, the sound bright and free, and pulled him down for another kiss. Somewhere in the city, the places where Lawrence Morgan had once ruled continued without him. Territories changed hands, new powers rose and fell. The underworld moved on, as it always did. But here, in this restaurant built on hope instead of fear, two survivors held each other and remembered. A rainy night at 2 a.m., a split-second decision to help instead of walk away. The moment everything changed. I remember everything, Lawrence whispered against my hair. So do I replied. And together we turned toward the future, hand in hand. Scars and all, ready to build a life where the only empire that mattered was the one we created together. In memory of everyone who chose compassion over fear, and everyone who proved that redemption is possible, even for those who've forgotten they deserve it. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comment below. If you love this story of survival, protection, and unexpected love, subscribe to our channel for more dark romance tales. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for being part of our community.